Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us today for CRUD in Angular Grid from SQL Server Web API. The gist of today's session is to show you how to wire up events essentially in the grid to do create, read, updates, and deletes in your application. So it's pretty cool and it's pretty simple. You'll see it's not very complex. So you have access to all the code and everything. So everything that I do here today is up in GitHub. Brian's going to paste the link. It's not complete yet because we haven't done the work, but by the end of the webinar, I'll check in all of our changes and you'll have the GitHub repo. So my name is Jason Barris. I'm a Senior VP of Developer Tools here at Infragistics. With me today is Brian Lagunas. He's our Senior Product Owner and man of many things at Infragistics. Zdravko, the team lead, is also on the line. He manages the app builder team and the Ignite UI team and does all the good stuff there. And of course, JJ and Jesse are with us as well. So please, if you have questions, all the folks here that can give you the right answers are online. So today what we're going to do, we're going to look at the web API that we created in the last webinar, just a quick review. And that's what we're going to consume in App Builder. We're going to create a UI in App Builder, and then we're going to modify that in Visual Studio Code and add everything there that does wire up all of these events. Ask questions in the chats or in the Q&A, whichever way you want to do it. Make sure in the chat you select to everyone, not just hosts and panelists, so then everyone gets it, because there's folks on that can answer questions from the product team that necessarily aren't a host. And the recording will also be sent out tomorrow. So you'll get the slides, the recording, and the GitHub repo and all that good stuff. As a reminder, this is a series of webinars that we're doing. And of course, this can change. If you guys post like, hey, can you do something different? But here's the idea. And these might be off by a day or two, depending on where you're at in the world. But we're doing minimal API, CRUD app in .NET today, Angular 14, App Builder. September 27th, 28th, we're going to do an app builder charting data visualizations. Then we're going to do something using the EF Core power tools. Our previous webinar, we used the Entity Framework command line, and we did some migrations, database first migrations into our app, which then created our model. And then we generated an API off of that, or we wrote the API off of that. What we're going to do in the next October 11th webinar is we're going to use the Entity Framework Core power tools. We're going to reverse engineer the SQL Server database, and it's going to generate everything we need for tables, views, and stored procedures. And then we're going to use that in a Blazor application or Angular. It doesn't really matter, but probably Blazor. October 25th, probably 22.2 will be shipped by then. We'll probably do a What's New in 22.2 webinar. Then November 8th, we're going to do stuff with Azure Key Vault. So one of the things that, if you were in the webinar 2 weeks ago, is when you're building your app locally, you want to use the user secrets on your project and not put all of your user ID, passwords, connection strings in app settings. Well, if you deploy that to an Azure app using Azure SQL, how do you keep your credentials secure? You use Azure Key Vault. It is sort of a pain in the neck to do this the first time. And then once you do it the first time, you're an expert. So what we're going to do is help you get through it for the first time. And then from there on out, you know how to connect Azure App Services to Azure SQL or PostgreSQL or anything you want with the Azure Key Vault, which is a secure, encrypted way of passing credentials around in the cloud. November 29th, we're going to do a bunch of Blazor CRUD, data entry, data forms, all kinds of neat stuff. And then December 13th, which will probably be the last webinar of this year, we'll do like a feature roundup of everything. So there's a lot of good stuff coming. And then as a refresher, why do you need App Builder? We go over these in every session, and we're going to also have a poll today. I believe we'll have a poll today. JJ can correct me if I'm wrong, or Jesse, but HTML and CSS are hard. We know that you spend more than a third of your time working in these areas where you're not expert. So what we're trying to do with App Builder is make it super easy for you to do all of the layout and screen design, do some data binding, wiring up controls, and then giving you that best practices, production ready code, so you don't have to do any of that work yourself. And then we do know designers are a luxury. Infragistics has been in business for over 30 years. I would say, majority of our customers are seasoned WPF and Windows Forms developers, and the web layout and having this way of being able to design stuff in Sketch or Figma is not something that you are used to, and it's not something that you have on your team. You need a way to build these applications fast, that look beautiful, that are responsive, where you really don't have to think. And that's what we're trying to do with App Builder. We're trying to be that extra part of your team that can help you deliver applications faster, that look beautiful and that are functional, etc. So with that, no more time wasted on stats and what's coming next. Let's get right into our demo. Got a bunch of different stuff here to show today, so it will be fun. So if you remember, this was some work that we did in the webinar a couple weeks ago. And in fact, all of that is already up on GitHub. So if you go to GitHub, let me just grab this guy here. I kind of forgot to give this to Brian to paste. So I think it was the API Blazor webinar. Yeah, I'm going to paste this into the chat. And then inside this chat here to everyone is a link to how to create this web API along with the webinar link. So it's a step-by-step. But the idea is that we use the Entity Framework tools that go along with Entity Framework and that Microsoft ships. And we generated a feature class. We generated a feature context, which connects to the database, creates objects for us to use and pass around in our app. And then we go from there. So it's pretty cool and pretty simple. And then in the actual program.cs is where we created our put, post, and gets that we consumed from the application. And in this particular example, it was a Blazor app, and you can look at the Blazor code. We're not going to go over that today. The other thing that I did here is, as I mentioned, when we built this web API and Brian was reviewing what I did, just using straight up Entity Framework, when I get the object from the client, so I get this body and I do a post or I do a put. Using Entity Framework with .NET, what it'll do is it'll automatically, with 2 lines of code, allow me to apply my incoming object, which in this case is a feature. That feature is this guy that you just saw, and that feature can then be saved. So I just say save changes. Well, if you want more control, we are passing the body object, and in the body of the feature, you have everything, all these fields available to you. So then you can say, hey, I want to do something special on this field, or I don't want to do this field when I do an update, delete, whatever. So you have complete control. And you'll see in the Angular app that we do today, we don't just pass the object. We actually create the header, we create the body, and then we pass that as part of the put in the post from the caller. So it gives you both best of both worlds. If you do a Google search, like how do I save something with Entity Framework and Web API, you're going to see both ways. This is the straightforward, easy way, basically works 100% of the time. And this is a way that gives you a little bit more control, and it basically works 100% of the time. So it's really up to you on what you're expecting in your code. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click run on this because we're going to consume this web API in our app. So you'll see here, this is the Swagger definition that comes up. So if I do a get, I click try it out, execute, and we will see the data that comes back. And then, for example, if I do a post and I click try it out, I can just type in here. So we'll do ID2 and we'll just say new title and new description, like so. Request or email, I'll just type in the word email and leave the rest there. We click execute, and our feature is added, it's posted, and this is what was returned back. And this is important as well. You'll notice that feature ID 16 popped up here. So if I go to my database and I execute this, here's feature ID 16. This is what we just added, right? And in the code, here. So let me go back to our running code. When I do a post, you'll see that we're saying return results. Okay, it worked. And also send back the new feature, right? So it applied the data that I wanted it to apply. But the key thing here is when I update the object on the client, I've got the new ID for this row, which is ID 16, which coming in, that ID was going to be 0. Applies to the database. I get that identity key and it returns back. So all this is important when you are creating your application. And that's how easy it is to do this from the Swagger. But now let's do it from Visual Studio Code. So the first thing I'm going to do is go over to my browser and I'm going to open up App Builder. You can get to App Builder at appbuilder.indigo.design, or just go to the Infragistics homepage, click App Builder, and you are good to go. So I'm going to create a new app here. And my new app is going to look like this. I'm going to use this template. So I've got this header plus mini nav plus content. I could have picked any one of these. But what I'm going to do to save time today is I'm going to create this in App Builder. I actually already have it running, the shell of this app, so I don't have to bore you guys with npm install and npm start, which could take like 2 minutes or maybe longer, who knows. But this is what we're going to do. So on my view 1, I am going to delete this guy here, and I'm going to do Control E, and I'm going to add a grid. So here's my grid. And I want to bind that data from this Swagger API, which is going to do my get. And I want to bind this to the grid. So I'm going to copy this guy. I'm going to minimize him. And I'm going to go over to my data tab. I already have it in here already, obviously, because I've been practicing. But I'm going to show you how to do a new Swagger anyway. I'm going to click REST API. And we'll just leave it at data source 1. I'm going to say Open API Swagger. And I am going to select that guy. I'm going to paste in the URL that I just got from my web API. I'm going to click Done. And you can see that it connected okay. I'm going to configure endpoints. And I can make sure that these work. So I got 200 okay on my get. And on my get here, I'll type in like feature ID 5, send this along. That basically sent it and I got no feature back, but that's fine. We're really not going to use that one anyway. But I'm going to say select data and I'll select everything. And then I'll select everything like so. And I'm going to click done. So now in my grid, I'm going to go to grid properties. I've got data source here and I'm going to say, give me all the features. So now I've got all my features. The other thing that I want to do here is make this look a little bit better. Has a little bit of padding around the edges, and I want to add some feature interaction. So I'm going to add cell selection, column, toolbar, exporting. And I'm not going to do paging. Row actions are important because we're going to be doing our CRUD through row action events, editing, selection, cell editing, grouping, hiding, moving, pinning, resizing. Great. All that stuff is there. Now my grid looks great. Click preview. And there I got my data in the grid. It generated all of the important code that I need to do the CRUD webinar. But since we have in our app a few screens, I got view 1, here's view 2. Whoops, here's view 2. What I'm going to do here is do a different layout. I'm going to do top bottom sort of layout here. On the top, I'm going to do a Control E. I'm going to add a grid. And I am going to add the Northwind customers table. And on the bottom, I'm going to do a Control E. And I'm going to add a chart. So there's my chart. And I'm just kind of putting stuff out here just so you can see how easy it is to create a layout and then do something with it and then bind to data. And then for view 3, what I want to do is I'm going to leave this guy empty again. And I'm going to add a card view. Now I'm doing Control E to get to my list of tools. I could also just go here, type in card view and drag this over and boom, there's my card view. I'm going to do the same here. I'm going to give this like a 10 pixel margin around every card view. I want this to be data bound and I am going to bind it to my reveal dashboards list, which is another webinar I did last week, which was kind of cool. I'm going to say show all the records. The type is going to be a social media column view. and let's go ahead and bind some data. So we'll bind title. So now my title is there. For the subtitle, I'm going to do date added like so. And for this big empty image, I'm going to bind it to the image property thumbnail URL. And now I've got this thumbnail URL. Now the other thing is I want this little guy to show the person who added it. So I click on the avatar. I'm going to change it from icon to image, and I'm going to bind it to added by image URL. These are all paths that I have in my data source. And then on the actual container, what I want to do is I want to set it to auto. So you'll see that this scroll bar showed up, and I want it to wrap. So now the scroll bar looks like that and looks beautiful. So now if I preview this, we've got our features list, which is where we're going to do the CRUD. And you'll notice this guy here is my action strip. It's got an edit, an add new, and a delete button. We're going to use those buttons. I've got this guy here, and I got this guy here. So basically a cool looking app. I did forget one thing, however. On our view here, what's going to happen is when you click that delete button and add button, I want the snack bar thing to pop up from the bottom and say, hey, you added a row or you added a record. So I'm going to go back to my toolbox. I'm going to type in snack bar here, drag this guy down, and you can see this is like that sort of a pop-up on the bottom. I do not want an action, so I'm going to remove it. And we can leave this is a message, and you'll see where that surfaces in the application. And then the other thing is I know Brian's on the call. He loves dark theme. So I'm switching this over to the dark theme. I could have done a light, fluent light. I could have done the fluent dark, but he's a big fan of material UI. And this is the material dark theme. So it looks absolutely beautiful. Look at that. And let's change this guy to go back here, master view, app name. This is going to be the grid CRUD demo, like so. All right, so now we're done. What do I do next? I'm going to leave it at untitled app because we're actually not going to use this particular piece of source code. I have the same exact thing, like I mentioned, already running, so we don't have to do the npm install. But let's publish it to GitHub, and we can call it, demo untitled app, and create the repository. And if anyone wants this, I'm going to click publish. And the nice thing is when you publish, it gives us a link directly to it. And if you want to go to town on this guy, we'll just paste it right here. And there you go. That is everything I just did in App Builder. By the way, if you send me your email and you want this in App Builder, we have the concept of workspaces. So I can create a new workspace and then just share this application with you and invite you to the workspace, which is amazing. And then the other cool thing is I maybe want to do this in Blazor. So I could just select Blazor, do the same exact thing. But we're gonna do Angular today, and we're good to go here. So we're gonna close this guy. Everything we have is up already in GitHub. So the repository that I'm going to be working off of is this grid CRUD Angular webinar. And what I want to highlight here is a particular file. It is called crudcodesnippets.txt. So this is all of the code that I'm going to be adding to today's project. So they're Visual Studio code snippets. You can grab these, add them to your Visual Studio Code, and you can follow along. And if you go to the other link that I sent, you just create your own database with SQL Express, create your web API, and you're good to go. So everything is already up here. So what I did is I have this running already in Visual Studio. So here's my VS Code, Grid CRUD Angular webinar. I have not modified this at all. This is just cloning the GitHub repo, doing the npm install, npm start, so we can actually get started. So this is the project that we just built. So I've got more or less, there might be some differences, but I tried to recreate it as fast as possible. But you can see I've got my card view here. I've got this, I've got this. This is all Angular, beautiful, and it all works. So, I did make two changes. I changed the width of these columns, and I'll show you where I did that, just so they look reasonable. Now, here's the point. Why we're doing this CRUD demo. We are in the process with App Builder of implementing a full CRUD experience in the product. We're not there yet. We will be there by the end of the year. So in the meantime, this is the code that you would write to implement the CRUD experience yourself using our Angular product. So when you do this, we've added this nice thing called the action strip. And the action strip lets you interact with the grid. Like I'm hitting delete here. I can do an add new row. So let's just add some data. But what's happening? We're not actually interacting with the database. Like if I can just double click here and edit this row and hit enter. And then the minute I hit refresh, it's the data that was there before. So now what we're going to do is we're going to wire all this up, and that's what's easy and fun to do. So I'm going to resize this a little bit, and I'm going to stick it right here so we can kind of see it behind my Visual Studio Code. And I'm going to put my Visual Studio Code right here, and we're going to go along step by step to update this app. So the first thing that we need to do is in our app folder here. So I've got my card view, my grid chart view, my grid view, and my services. What I want to do is create a new folder called models. And this models, I'm going to create that same exact feature model that we used in our web API. So I'm going to do a new file here. We're going to call this features.model.ts. And then in this guy, I, of course, have a code snippet. And this is exactly what we had in our other web API. And this is what we're going to use here. So when we update data, we're going to update product ID, title, description, email. Date added is automatic. Not only is it new date here, but in the database itself, if we go to SQL Server, I actually use a function here to add a new date or add the current date automatically. So I've got an identity field, and then in date added, I've got get date. So there is no way to get around that. So you don't even have to put a date in if you don't want to. So now I've got my feature class. And then if we go to services, what happens is, here's my feature service. What happens is when we generate the code, we actually create the data service for anything that you connect in App Builder. So this is the data service to get all the features. This is the data service to get the financial data. This is the data service to get my Northwind data. And so there's all this code that happens behind the scenes, but it's all straight up Angular code or Blazor code. It's not like there's something sneaky that we're doing that you wouldn't recognize in your own code. So what am I going to do here? We're pointing to localhost 7229, which is here, which is already running. So we have to keep this running. And what I want to do is change this observable to that feature object that I just added. So you'll notice I started to type it. It said, hey, do you want to add your features.model? Yes, as a matter of fact, I would like to add my features model. And then in my HTTP GET, what I want to do is make sure that we're actually getting the right type and we're passing this guy around. So I'm going to say, give me a feature back. And that just makes it a little bit cleaner. And because in Angular, you can just say the type is any and everything will work perfectly. But this gives you a little bit more IntelliSense. So everything's still working as expected with that little update. And now to sort of just test a little bit, I'm going to add the web service call for delete. And I have all this so you don't have to see me type all of this in code snippets. But this is what we're doing. Is everything that I end up doing a put, post, delete, we're going to do a console.log. So you'll be able to see what's actually happening. But here we are saying return. And remember that these are asynchronous calls going to our web API and they're always returning something. So we saw that even when we deleted or we posted something, we got that primary key back. Same thing with the delete. So you're going to get something back that says, yeah, that was actually successful. You have this fixed or this first value from what? My HTTP delete. What am I passing or what type am I passing? I'm passing this feature type, which is here, this feature object. And I'm going to pass to the web API, the feature ID, which is ID 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now in the code snippets, just so you know, we have here this API endpoint. And the way that you reference this API endpoint is with the $ brackets. When you add the code snippet, for some reason, it kind of removes those. It must be a code snippet thing. So when you're doing this yourself, make sure that you replace this with the correct endpoint. So now it doesn't matter if I click delete here, nothing's going to happen because it's not wired up. Even though we have added the service call, now we need to go over to the grid view and do a few things here to make this work. So the first thing that I want to do is I'm going to stay right here and I'm going to give this grid an ID. So this is something that we're going to reference back in our code behind. And my action strip, here's my action strip grid toolbar. Oh, you know what? I must not, in this guy, I must not have added my snack bar. So I'm going to go ahead and add an IGX snack bar. And in the IGX snack bar, we're going to give this a name of snack bar. And the way that this works is it has this outlet property, and you're going to tell it that the outlet goes to this grid guy here. So they're sort of related at that point. And then this is where you would put your message. We're actually going to populate the message from our code behind. And how do we do our code behind? Well, it's really easy. The grid has a bunch of events that you can call. I do my parentheses, and you can see everything here that you can do on a grid event. And in this case, what we want to do is we want to do the row deleted event, and we're just going to call it the same thing. We're going to say row deleted like so, and I'm going to pass it the event arguments of my row deleted. So you can probably guess once we get to it, we're going to add a row added and a row edited. But in this case, it's going to be called row edit done is what it's actually called. Now, this has the red squiggly, and it says view the problem. Oh, man. I was hoping it was going to give me the ability to create this, because that's what it should be doing, but that's okay. Usually you've got the quick fix available for this because it's saying, hey, there's nothing created, and then it'll actually create it in the code behind for you, but we're just going to go ahead and do that ourselves. So now that we're here, we're going to make some changes now to our code behind for the grid view, which is where all of the sort of magic happens. So on init is where we're doing our service call and we're getting data. We're binding that data to the grid. Again, the same thing as earlier. We've got public features type equals any. What I'm going to do is do the same thing that we did before. I'm going to add the feature service, and we're just going to make sure this guy is not null like so. And now it's going to bind to that type. Features is what's being passed around, binding to these services. Then the other thing that I need to do is I want to reference my grid and my snack bar from my code behind. So in this case, in my code snippets, I've got this grid plus snack bar view child, which will let us reference those properties or objects in our HTML. And what I want to do here is hover over and do my quick fixes. So this is going to update Angular core. And then the same for the grid X component is an Ignite UI Angular. The IGX snack bar component, again, an Ignite UI Angular. So all this stuff is ready to rock and roll. So I can reference my grid and I can reference my snack bar. So we're good to go there. So now the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to add my functions for the delete and the add in the update. So I'm going to do, and these are asynchronous method calls. So we call it row deleted like so. And what are we getting from row deleted? We're getting our event. And then from the event, and let's see if we get our IntelliSense here. So this is nice. So, and this is the nice thing that this is what happens when you get the IntelliSense is it'll automatically add the grid object event that comes into play here. So in this case, it's going to be an iGrid. Let's see, row edit done. Let's go back actually, so I don't have to guess. I'll do my code behind my row deleted. And I'm still not getting it. Shoot, I always forget if it's iGrid edit done or the other one. So let me just get that real quick here. I got too many things open here. So row deleted is I row data event args is what you want here. So actually we'll just copy this guy and get rid of this. So it has the event. So I row data event args, and that quick fix update from our IGX grid component. And that's all we're going to do. So I have my row deleted function. I've got the event data coming from my code behind. I'm looking at my I row data event args, and then what am I going to do with that? So what I do is, again, asynchronous. I call my feature service. So the feature service is the actual service object that we looked at earlier, which calls get features. Well, in this case, we're going to call delete feature. What am I going to pass it? I'm going to pass it event data. And then the snack bar, remember that little block of code that I said we're going to add our own stuff in there? We're going to say this.snackbar.open, and we're going to say row deleted. So now if we go look at our HTML, you'll see we don't have our squiggly there anymore because we've added our row deleted function, and we're good to go. So let's go here. Let's open up our developer tools. And let's look at the console, which is showing. And now when I hover over this guy and hit the delete key, I get my row deleted snack bar. And then you can see that I had in the service call that it was getting this object, feature ID 16, and all the stuff that goes with it. And it returned back to me like, hey, you know, this guy was actually deleted. So now if I go to SQL Server and we go back to our query, and we execute this guy, you'll notice that feature ID 16 is no longer there. So we did three things. You added your web service function, which does an HTTP delete to your web API, which we created in our last webinar. We added code behind in the TypeScript file for the grid view, which is actually calling the grid delete. And then in the HTML, we added the simple event that will interact with our grid actions right here, our action strip object, which does sort of all the work for us. So now if we do a couple more of these, we'll do a row added, and I'm going to say row added, and then we'll do event like so. And we're going to do a row, and this one's a little bit different. This one's called row edit done. But if I go back and let me just type in row again. So customers, you guys do things completely like your own way, and you need lots of events. So I'm showing you the super basic way. If you wanted to do something on row add, like the physical thing of adding the row, you may want to populate cells with something. Row added is going to happen when I'm trying to, actually apply the row add, the row added event. Row edit is when I enter edit mode, but then we also have an edit done, an edit exit, and an edit enter. So like, let's say I hit F2 and I'm starting an edit operation on a cell. You have complete control over how your edit operations work. And the other thing, I am using the action strip. We also have batch editing. So you could edit multiple things across multiple cells and do a batch post. You could have forms where you're just adding stuff one at a time. It's completely up to you how this works. We are not restricting you in any way whatsoever. Row edit done and event, and we get all the event args from that. Let's see. I don't know why the heck it doesn't give me that. Earlier today, none of my IntelliSense worked, and that's really when you start to get a little bit stressed out when IntelliSense kind of breaks down. So let's go and just add these real quick. I'm going to do a row added, async row added, and let's do a code behind here for row edit done. And I'm going to do a Command Shift P format document. I'm going to go ahead and update the imports here. And let's see, add feature, row added, iRow event args, new feature, add feature, quick fix. Oh, of course. Is anyone going to win the prize today? We still haven't added our add and our update and our service. I'm like, wait a minute, what's going on here? So what did we do? We added our delete initially. We didn't add our add or update, but you can see they're following the same pattern. The difference here is you'll notice that on this guy, for adding a new feature, if you recall when I did it by hand, I got that object back that gave me the identity field. We're going to get that back and put it in this thing called new feature. New feature then is going to be used to update the values of that row based on the feature ID that we pulled from the event data that we're getting from the object. So that is how it all kind of works together and why each one of these is slightly different. Row edit done, again, slightly different. And the reason is I'm checking to make sure that we're not in an add row event. So when you're adding a new row or you're editing a new row, you get multiple events firing. So you have to make sure that, you know, if you're doing your testing and like maybe two things show up, like, yo, row added and row edited or something, check to make sure that certain events aren't firing. So I'm making sure that is add row. We're not in an add row event here. So let's go ahead and do the add feature and update feature. So we're going to go back to our feature service. So here's our delete feature. And these guys we have already implemented. So I'm going to do here the add feature, and then I'll type in API, and this is how you would do it as well. Do update feature. Let's go ahead and do a format document. Now there's a couple changes that we're going to make here. HTTP headers, and I mentioned this before, that what we're doing is we are creating the headers and the body, and then on the post, we are passing the body and the headers as part of the post. If you don't want to do that and you literally want it to be one line of code, you can just do an HTTP put or post, pass it the feature object, the URL or the type, which is type feature, and then the feature body. So these two lines of code or these three lines of code can be replaced by this one line of code. I'm showing you this because there are things that you may want to customize. You may want to change the HTTP headers. You may want to modify data that's being sent over. So this is how you would manipulate the header and the body. Then, of course, the other thing I mentioned are API endpoints. Let me copy these guys and paste them in like so. Oops. Like so. And we are good to go. So everything's back up and running. So you can see that my application isn't erroring out anymore. So why don't we do an add new? I'm going to do a product ID of 3, and we'll just say add new description, email new, and I'm going to hit enter. And there you go. We've got the data posted, and you know that we've got our var new feature coming back, which then we did the grid update row, because the 17 here is the identity field. This is a primary key field. If I don't have that, so if I don't do this guy here, if we comment this out, let's go back and we'll add another row. So now I'm going to do an add row, and I'm going to do a 3, 3, 3, 3, click done. Okay, it's still added. But look I didn't accept the return, and it's still the -1, which is like an internal number we use for the field when it says it's a primary key. How do you know it's a primary key? Well, in App Builder, you actually specify it's a primary key, or here in your grid definition, here's my IGX grid, I'm saying the primary key is feature ID. So you want to make sure that you know some of these tips and tricks. Now, if I hit refresh, 333 is still going to be there. There it is. Now let's go ahead and delete these guys, delete that guy. Let's do this update and update. Look at how fast I can do this. I'm going to hit done. And now that guy's updated, and that went off to the server and updated everything. So that's it. We spent a little bit more time than the webinar allotted today, but that is how you create a CRUD grid with a web API using the action strip with events that are 2 or 3 lines each in your code behind. And then you have your features that you set up all of this is a repeatable pattern. So there's nothing like special about anything that's happening here or even here in my web API. These are all pattern, and all of this stuff was code generated. This was the only code that we wrote. So it doesn't matter if you have one table or 500 tables, you're basically repeating the same pattern over and over and over again. You're creating an API with an endpoint, with a put, post, get, delete, maybe a get by ID in your client app, and then you are, binding to grids, binding to lists, etc. And that webinar that I highlighted, where we're going to do like forms, we're essentially going to do something fairly similar, where you've got maybe a form, or you click a grid, it pops up a form, something like that, where you're not interacting directly with the grid. And by the way, the grid has all kinds of other events that you can use. If you look at our docs and you're thinking, wait a minute, because this came up today, Pablo was like, well, is it normal to have a plus row on the action strip? And my answer was probably not. The action strip is completely customizable. We have some default things here. So for example, I could pin this row to the top, I could unpin, and you can add whatever you want. You can make this look however you want. So you could have an up here on the toolbar, which is customizable. You could have an add row button, and you could add an empty row. And we have all the docs to show you how to do all this stuff. So it's really up to you. You might have a form that pops up. We're not stopping you. This is just one way to do it. And the code, however, the code is the same no matter which way you do it. You're populating the body of your feature, and then you're going to pass that feature over to a web service, and that's all you got to do. So now what I'm going to do, I am going to update it with code. I'm going to commit all this, so that that URL that we posted earlier, all of the in the GitHub repo, you have it all now. So yeah, you're good to go. I don't know why it's not posting, but it'll get up there eventually. So if it doesn't happen in the next few seconds, then it'll be there in the next 5 minutes. All right, so yeah, I killed that. So let's go back to our slides, and we can wrap this guy up, and we'll take a look at any questions. So sign up today. Go to appbuilder.indigo.design. Hopefully you saw how easy it was to tie all this together. I highly recommend you watch the previous webinar from a couple weeks ago if you want to see how we created that web API, mostly for that, to learn how to use the tools, the entity framework tools, which are extremely powerful. And we've got a playlist up on YouTube with a bunch of help. And yeah, hopefully you can see with App Builder, you can create like a really beautiful UI, a quick drag and drop, and then you add a little bit of code. And as I mentioned, a lot of that code, when we start doing these webinars, December timeframe, January timeframe, all that code goes away because we're going to do it all for you. So it's going to be pretty fun to do these webinars next year. We'll really have to think about what we're going to do. So thank you again, everyone. I really appreciate your time today.